Amaka was still very young when her mother took her away to live in the city with her uncle, Mr. Johnson. That night, before traveling to the city to meet Uncle Johnson, Amaka's mother told her to be obedient to her uncle. "Make sure you listen to your uncle," her mother said. "He is a good man. Don't be a disrespectful child. Remember everything I told you and do whatever your uncle tells you to do," Amaka's mother said. Then she began to arrange Amaka's luggage for the journey to Uncle Johnson. Very early the next morning, Uncle Johnson drove into the compound. Amaka was already prepared and waiting for her uncle to come and take her to the city. Amaka happily took all her bags into the car and sat down in the car happily while the car engine started. Amaka's mother looked a little sad. The city was far from the town, which was going to make it impossible for her to see her daughter anytime soon. "Amaka, the city is a place of modern life. Be wise and don't forget everything I said to you," Amaka's mother said, while waving at the car as it moved out of the compound. Uncle Johnson drove faster to the city. The journey to the city was like a journey to heaven. Amaka enjoyed watching all the different things that they passed through. Things she never had the opportunity to experience in her town. As they drove through the city, Amaka saw tall buildings, busy streets, and people from all walks of life. She was amazed by the sights and sounds of the city. Uncle Johnson noticed her amazement and smiled. "You will get used to the city life soon," he said. "It's a place of opportunities and challenges." Amaka nodded, taking in every word. They finally arrived at Uncle Johnson's house in the city. Amaka was so shocked to see the big mansion her uncle was living in. After taking her luggage inside, Amaka was given some snacks to eat while she sat down on the couch to watch the television. Her uncle, Mr. Johnson, was a young man who was a successful businessman. He was rich and had a lot of luxurious properties. Uncle Johnson had a wife and 2 children who lived with him in the city of Lagos. But Uncle Johnson's wife was a traveler. She was always traveling from one state to another. She never had the chance to stay with her husband at the city. Sometimes she would come visit twice in a month. As Amaka settled into her new life, she began to notice that her uncle's behavior towards her was changing. He would often find excuses to touch her or make her feel uncomfortable. At first, Amaka thought maybe her uncle was just being overly affectionate. But as the incidents continued, Amaka realized that something was terribly wrong. She felt trapped and scared, and she didn't know who to turn to. One day, while Amaka was staying with her uncle, she was inside the living room with Uncle Johnson's children. She heard her name from a distant room. It was her uncle who screamed her name. So she quickly stood up and went to meet her uncle. Uncle Johnson was inside his bedroom. It was Saturday, so Mr. Johnson stayed at home because it was a day off. He was inside his room watching a video on a small mini television placed at the right side of his bedroom. The video was an adult video which was improper for a young girl like Amaka. Amaka rushed into the room while she saw her uncle sitting on his bed, watching the television. Uncle Johnson noticed that Amaka was wearing a very attractive dress. He stared at her for some seconds and said, "Amaka, I want you to go and get me a glass of water." "Okay, uncle, I will get you the water immediately," Amaka said and went away to get the water for Uncle Johnson. After leaving the room, Uncle Johnson began to have a bad thought about his niece. He got influenced by the movie he was watching. So he wanted to do exactly what he saw in the movie to his niece. Uncle Johnson never had the opportunity to be with his wife because she was always traveling from one place to another. This was because of the business his wife was into. She had to travel from one place to another to meet up with her customers. So, as a man, he was not comfortable staying alone without his wife staying by his side. Amaka came back to her uncle, holding a glass of water. Then she gave Uncle Johnson the glass of water. Uncle Johnson collected the water and dropped it on the small table closer to his bed. Then he stood up and went to lock the door. As a young girl, Amaka was confused and did not understand why her uncle was locking her up inside his room. He looked at her face anxiously and asked, "Amaka, I want you to give me something." "Uncle, I don't have anything to give you." I'm just a young girl. What can a young girl like me give to my uncle? Amaka said to her uncle. Yes, you have something to give to me, something my wife hardly does for me, Uncle Johnson said while staring at her body. Amaka was confused and wanted to know what her uncle was talking about. She thought for a while, but couldn't figure out what her uncle was talking about. Uncle Johnson proceeded by putting his hands on Amaka's shoulder. He rubbed her softly at her shoulder. He tried to bring his hand to where he was not supposed to touch, but Amaka quickly removed his hands from her body. Uncle, my mummy told me never to allow anyone to touch me there, Amaka said to her uncle. While she stood watching her uncle, her face was covered with fear. Her uncle was already into her. He wanted to take advantage of the opportunity. Amaka, remember your mother told you to do whatever I say. That is because she knows I will not hurt you. Just let me touch it now, Uncle Johnson said with a soft voice. Amaka thought for a while and remembered that her mother warned her never to disrespect Uncle Johnson. Dio, whatever your uncle tells you to do. Her mother's voice flashed her memory. Then she allowed her uncle to touch her exactly where he wanted. As a young girl, she had never experienced what she was facing, so she did not properly understand what her uncle was doing. But Uncle Johnson proceeded even further. At this point, she couldn't bear it anymore and told her uncle to stop. But Uncle Johnson was greedy and wanted to take things to another level. She tried removing herself from the situation, but she couldn't. She cried and cried, but nobody was there to come for her. Meanwhile, Uncle Johnson's children were at the living room watching movies. They had been waiting for Amaka to come back so they could continue playing and watching the movie together. They never knew that Amaka was undergoing something unforgivable from their father. Soon they began to hear her voice. A voice that sounded like she was in trouble. One of Mr. Johnson's children decided to go and check what was happening. As she walked towards Amaka's voice, she realized that the cry was coming straight from her father's bedroom. The little boy was wondering what could be happening inside the room. So he went further and held the door. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. Uncle Johnson quickly noticed that someone was standing at the door. When he heard the voice, he realized it was his son, David. Uncle Johnson opened the door and pretended like nothing was happening. David walked inside anxiously. Father, what is wrong with our friend? I heard her crying, the little boy asked. Don't worry, David, your friend had an accident while she was bringing me a glass of water. She fell and broke her arm, so I was giving her a soft massage on the affected part of her arm, Johnson said to his son. Amaka knew her uncle was lying. She couldn't speak out because her uncle told her to remain silent. She was sad and angry. That day was going to be the unforgettable day of her life. That night Mr. Johnson realized that Amaka was still sad. So he went to her and told her to clean her tears. I have done nothing wrong to you. You are almost a woman now. Don't worry, you will soon be used to it as time goes on, Uncle Johnson said. Amaka was confused and didn't know what to say. Uncle, I don't want you to do that to me again. It pains, Amaka said. Amaka's uncle smiled and said, Amaka, I'm not hurting you, it's just a play between me and you. Don't worry, next time we will play a different type of game. Uncle Johnson convinced. Then he brought out plenty of snacks and milk. He gave it to her as a gift from him. Amaka accepted the plenty gift, which made her smile a bit. Amaka, your mother will be coming to the city to visit us tomorrow. Make sure you don't tell her anything, or you will hate your uncle stopping buying you plenty snacks, said Mr. Johnson. No, Uncle, I want you to buy me plenty more snacks, Amaka said to Uncle Johnson. Amaka was confused and didn't know what to do. She didn't want to disobey her uncle, but she also didn't want him to continue doing what he was doing. As the night went on, Amaka couldn't sleep. She was thinking about what had happened and what she should do. She knew she had to tell someone, but who could she trust? The next day, Amaka's mother arrived in the city, eager to visit her daughter. Amaka was excited to see her mother, but she was also nervous about what had happened with her uncle. As they sat down to eat, Amaka's mother asked her how she was doing. Amaka wanted to tell her mother everything, but she was scared of what might happen. "I'm fine, Mummy," Amaka said, trying to hide her true feelings. Her mother looked at her closely, sensing that something was wrong. "Amaka, is everything okay?" her mother asked again. Amaka hesitated, unsure of what to say. Just then, Uncle Johnson walked into the room, smiling and pretending to be a good man. "I left my daughter in your care, and I'm happy you're taking good care of her. May God continue to bless you for taking care of my daughter," Amaka's mother said. "Don't worry, I'll take good care of her. Amaka is a very obedient girl. I'll be taking her to a new school when it starts," Mr. Johnson said. Amaka's mother was happy because her daughter was finally going to resume her education again. She couldn't afford to further Amaka's education because she had no money. That was one of the reasons she gave her daughter to her brother. Amaka's mother stayed with them for 2 weeks. During that period, Mr. Johnson wasn't able to carry out his plan with the young girl. That's because her mother was around, and it would have been a risk for him to take such action. Exactly at the end of the 2nd week, Amaka's mother prepared her luggage and decided to go back to her own town. Before leaving, Uncle Johnson gave her plenty of food items and other things that would be of great help to her. He also gave her some extra money to take home. He did all that to show that he was a good person. Amaka's mother was wondering what suddenly made Uncle Johnson give her plenty of gifts and money. She accepted them and waved goodbye to Amaka before going to the motor park. After Amaka's mother traveled back to her town, Mr. Johnson was anxious and wanted to make Amaka uncomfortable again. While the kids were fast asleep, Amaka was busy cleaning the whole house. She heard her uncle call her name. At that moment she became scared again. She knew her uncle wanted to make her uncomfortable again. As she stood holding the broom, she couldn't run or say no to the call. There was no choice for her. She gently dropped the broom on the floor and began to walk to her uncle's room. As she opened the door, her heart raced while standing at the entrance of the room. "Amaka, I have plenty of snacks for you. Just come and let's play our game, and I'll give you all the snacks," Uncle Johnson said to her. "But Uncle, the game makes me feel uncomfortable," Amaka said to him. But Uncle Johnson continued to convince her, telling her it was just a game. And again, Amaka fell for his tricks. But this time he heard a knock on the door. It wasn't his kids anymore. It was a knock from his wife, who usually traveled around for business. "Darling, it's me. Open the door, I'm back," his wife shouted from afar while approaching the door. She tried opening the door, but it was locked. So she wondered why her husband would suddenly lock himself up inside the bedroom. As soon as Amaka heard the voice, her face lit up with joy. She felt a surge of hope, knowing that someone had finally arrived to rescue her from her troubled situation.